Welcome to episode 66.
Hey, this is John Lee Dumas of EO Fire, and you're listening to Who Did That Voice, where we take an in-depth look at voiceovers.
Finally, warmer weather is here, and there is no better time than right now to book your vacation getaway with 3D Travel Company. Head on over to our website at www.whodidthatvoice.co and click the Book Now button on the left-hand side. They give a complimentary quote so you can get an idea of what it will cost to take your summer vacation. For a limited time, Who Did That Voice listeners can receive a Disney gift card for qualifying Disney and Universal trips, booked and traveled by the end of 2017. Hurry and book today so you can travel away.
Welcome to Who Did That Voice, the show where we take an in-depth look at voiceover. And now, here's your host, Trenton Larkin.
Hey you guys, this is a special shout out to all my listeners around the world. Who Did That Voice is now heard in over 78 different countries, and I can't thank you guys enough. Here in the USA and abroad, thank you for listening to Who Did That Voice. Keep listening and sharing with your friends. Hey all you Marvel and Spider-Man fans out there, Who Did That Voice is doing an entire month with cast and crew from the 1994 Spider-Man the Animated Series, which aired on Fox Kids. You won't want to miss the month of June on Who Did That Voice. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today's special guest voiced Harry Osborne, aka Green Goblin II, on the 1994 Spider-Man the Animated Series.
Once your father. It wouldn't do to cut me out of your life.
I didn't want you in my head. I didn't need you. Until now. Now I need you.
No, not here again. That makes sense. It's where I ended his father's career, and where he wants to end mine. Harry, we've been friends a long time. It doesn't have to end this way.
Friends? Is that what we were, Peter? You could have fooled.
Missile on target. Look out!
So, you let your friend here, did you? Thought you'd betray me once more. Guess again, traitor.
Get away from here! You'll never be able to stop him!
I'm beginning to think you are a son of mine.
Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Who Did That Voice. Today on the show I have Gary Imhoff joining me. Gary, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
It's my pleasure to be with you.
We're going to dive into some amazing stuff that Gary has been a part of here in a moment, and you guys are probably going to think, wow, this is awesome, because I know I sure do. Gary, the very first thing we always like to do when we have a special guest on the show, especially for the first time, is to get a little background on who they are, and who was Gary growing up from the little boy into the man that became an actor, and more specifically, a voice actor.
Well, all right. Where do we start? I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was raised there till I was about 10. My next door neighbor across the street and best friend, her mother was the star of the local community theater. I don't know whether that affected me or not, but from the age of 4, I was producing plays on the doorstep for anybody who would come and watch. In 5th grade, in that same area, I played Coco in The Mikado. I was also a singer, and the high school did the costumes and the makeup, and I decided at that moment this was what I wanted to do with my life. Then, let's see, just to give you a quickie, we moved to Boston, outside of Boston, a little town called Acton, Massachusetts, when I was 10. And I got involved in the community theater and the local plays. I've pretty much been an actor since I was born. It's been a desire of mine. Now, the interesting thing about voices is My father was an artist. He'd given it up. He was a trumpet player and a cartoonist and all kinds of things. But he used to run around doing accents all the time.
Nice.
And the first accent I remember him doing was Ludwig von Drake from the Donald Duck cartoons. And he'd be, I'm going around the place here. We are going to go to a fun razzmatazz thing. And so I started copying that voice. And so I guess that's kind of where it all started.
That's really awesome, Gary, because my story is very similar. My dad used to mimic voices, and the very first one was Marvin the Martian for me. But Lon von Ludwig, he was one of my favorite characters, super fascinating, and you're dead on with that accent, so I love it.
Yeah.
So, wow. Well, Gary, thank you so much for kind of giving us some background. So how did you end up getting to the point where voiceover was kind of your thing beyond the accent your father, you mimicked and everything?
Well, when I was 19, I auditioned for a show. It's one of the rare opportunities for a off-Broadway show. Godspell held open auditions in Boston. I was 19 and I was in transition. I was a student at the New England Conservatory of Music studying voice and wanted to transfer to Princeton. So I was kind of in flux, and a neighbor called me up and said, you should go audition for this. That was really my ultimate first dream, was Broadway. And I went down and auditioned, and 6 callbacks later, I signed my first Broadway production contract.
Nice.
And they actually brought me to, well, actually, hang on, before that, the stage manager of the Boston production recommended me to a manager in New York, and I flew into New York and met her, and she went crazy over me and wanted to represent me. And then I started auditioning in New York. And I guess voiceover started in New York, partially because of my ability to mimic voices. There was a show called Big Blue Marble on PBS. I'm now dating myself with certain people, which was a show that went around the world and filmed kids in either occupations as kids or the kinds of recreational activities that they did. And the kids would do their own voiceovers in English, but their English wasn't very good.
Yeah.
So somehow I auditioned for one of those shows to replace the kid's voice, but with his accent.
Okay.
And I did really well, and I went in and I replaced the first voice, and then I kind of got on their list. And they would call me up and they would say, can you do a Yugoslavian accent? And I said, well, I've never done one, but do you have the kid on tape? And they said yes, and I said sure. So I would go down and I would listen to the kid's accent, and I would mimic his accent but clean it up. And I don't know, I must have done 8 or 9 or 10 of those shows. And my manager got the idea that I was good at voiceovers, and then I started auditioning for commercials. And I did a lot of radio commercials in New York. And then when I came out here, that had kind of become a part of me. So I got a voiceover agent, and that's when it all started.
Well, that's fantastic, Gary. Thank you so much for diving into it. You know, the first thing I really wanted to touch on, which both of the things we're fixing to talk about were something I grew up actually loving and had no idea there was a correlation in your voice. So the first one was Thumbelina, which released back in March of 1994, where you played Prince Cornelius.
I certainly did.
Let me be your wings.
Oh, you're a singer too.
I am. I love that song. It's always stuck with me for all times, and it was just a show that really blew me away. And then realizing Jodi Benson was Thumbelina, I'm like, holy cow.
Yep.
You know, and the correlation we'll mention here in a moment for the other show that always meant so much to me growing up, we'll talk about here. But how did you become a part of Thumbelina? Because I think it's a cartoon that's known, but I don't know if it's super known, but I think it needs to be more known.
Yeah, it's an interesting film. I think if Disney had made it, it would have been a huge hit, and Let Me Be Your Wings probably would have won the Academy Award. But because Warner Brothers produced it, they do not market their animation films anywhere. They don't have the marketing magic that Disney does, and probably, I mean, they probably could have the money that if they wanted it, but for some reason they never put their emphasis there. And I think that's one of the reasons the film is not bigger than it is. I auditioned. I submitted an audition tape through my agent. I knew that I probably had an edge because of my singing voice.
Yeah.
And you know, there aren't as many singing voiceover actors in Los Angeles as there are singers in New York. And so I knew when I submitted the audition tape, they wanted a song and the reading of the part. And I was also really, really, really good at playing young, you know, teenage kind of kids, which I guess Prince Cornelius was. We never really nailed down his age since he was a fairy prince. But I got the audition, and I'm trying to remember if I even had a callback. I believe I did have a callback, and then I got the part. The fun thing about that job, which a lot of people may or may not know, most voiceover jobs in film, you don't work with the other actors. You only work with the director. You work in a booth isolated, and the director directs you into, this is the way Disney does all of its films, the director directs you into whatever reading he wants, and then he puts together his film. And if the actors ever meet, they only meet the first time for a around-the-table script reading. But Don Bluth works completely differently. He likes the actors in the room. So I worked with every actor, almost every actor, that I worked with that is with me on film. I worked with them live. Jodi and I worked live for 5 days in the studio. We had more fun because it's just rarely ever done that way.
Oh, that's fantastic that y'all got to do ensemble for the majority of the actors. Yeah. Did you ever get to work with Loren Lester?
Well, Loren Lester's been a friend of mine for 3 decades.
No way. No
yeah,
way.
His wife and Kelly Lester, Kelly Richmond Lester, is a singer, and I used to do concerts here in many different places, but mostly at the Brandeis Bardeen Institute in Simi Valley. We used to do summer concerts, and we all used to work together. So I've known Loren for decades.
Fantastic. Well, I knew he was on that show too, and I actually interviewed him and had him on back. He aired Christmas Day last year, and so you'll have to say hi for me. But
I will.
I can't believe you guys know each other. That's fantastic. But I knew he was on Thumbelina, and just thought, sometimes actors know each other, sometimes they don't ever see each other, and sometimes they already have this great relationship. So
that's right.
That's fantastic. Right. That's wonderful. Well, it's a movie that impacted my life as a kid because I have little sisters, and growing up, it was a movie they watched over and over and over again, along with the Little Mermaid. So Jodi Benson, who was the Little Mermaid on Disney's Little Mermaid, was in our home all the time. And then, of course, you were as well. And then on Fox Kids, we had Spider-Man, the 1994 series, where you played Harry Osborne. And I never, ever put the two together. I'm going, this voice has some twinge of familiarity, but I'm going, what is it? And then I look it up, over the course of interviewing, getting ready for this interview, and I'm going, no frickin' way. Yep. Green Goblin is Prince Cornelius.
Yep.
So how did you get involved with that project, Gary?
An audition again. Interestingly enough, on that particular job, when I had the callback in the studio for everybody, I had a feeling that I was going to do something most actors wouldn't do. They had me read Harry, but because later in the seasons I become the Green Goblin, I sort of take over that identity from my father through some sort of metaphysical something. And so when I read the Green Goblin, I added a laugh. And I had a feeling when I added that laugh, I went, oh, I think I just helped myself at least get close, if not get the job.
Yeah.
I certainly had a sense I was going to be in hot contention. And that laugh has gone down into history because they really liked it. And I did it many times in the show.
Well, absolutely. Well, and I loved, for a while there, the Green Goblin's voice was still Neil Ross, but
That's
eventually
right.
It did transition to where you were not just Harry, but when Green Goblin's voice was happening, it wasn't Neil Ross anymore. It was actually your own voice.
That's right.
Which was
Harry
fantastic.
becomes the Green Goblin. I think it's in season 5. And somehow my father gets amnesia or something. I don't remember all the details, but I take over that identity.
He gets sucked into the flux capacitor, and then like psychologically you guys somehow connect, and you start seeing his reflection in the mirrors. And it was actually season 4, episode 8, almost season 5.
Oh, you've got your episodes down. You're better than I am.
Well, I just finished watching the entire series a week ago because I've had John Semper on the show, and I had Scott Cleverdon on the show who played I'm totally blanking, Carnage. So I've had several different people on the show, but I was finally able to get through the entire series because it was just one that impacted my life so much as a kid. Right. And it was the return of the Green Goblin, the first episode when Harry becomes the Green Goblin. And that was super fantastic. And, kind of jumping back real quick to Thumbelina, I was going to ask you about singing and everything, but you kind of had said, you grew up in musical theater and everything. But it's great that you were able to play Prince Cornelius and do the singing voice, because I know a lot of times, even in that regards, there will be a different actor for the voice, for the vocal voice, and then the singing voice as well. So I'm glad you were able to do both of those voices there.
Yep. Just to interrupt for a second, I don't know whether even because it's not widely publicized, but I am also for 2 songs the singing voice of Timon in Timon and Pumbaa, the Lion King series, the television series, because that actor who replaced Nathan Lane on the show apparently doesn't sing or didn't sing as well as they wanted him to, so they secretly hired me. I sang Stand By Me and When the Lion Sleeps Tonight. Those were the 2 songs that I recorded.
And those are like the 2 most iconic songs from that series.
Yep. Well, that's me.
Wow. Dude, Gary, man, you're just blowing my mind today, brother. Well, that is fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. You know, because there's all these like inside secrets that sometimes I get from people when I interview them. And you're right, they're just things that who's going to know them. It's not necessarily documented anywhere. Nobody necessarily knows them as a majority. But, you know, that's why I want people on the show to share these awesome hidden little jewels of voiceover.
Yep, that one was fun.
Well, you know, at the end of the show, I'm going to definitely ask you to close us out as the Green Goblin II when we get to that point. So that will be super cool. But what was it like for you getting to play such an iconic comic book character?
Oh, it was fantastic. The interesting thing about it is, I hate to admit this, but I wasn't a big Spider-Man fan as a kid. I wasn't a big comic book fan as a kid. So when I first got the audition, I ran out to a bookstore and wanted to catch up, and I bought, God, I don't know how many volumes I have. I think I have 4 or 5 volumes of all of the comics put together in hardbound volumes, and I read every single one of them. So I became a Spider-Man fan, and then I did research, and I found out that this was the first superhero. Part of what made Spider-Man famous was he had real problems, and he was a real person, and went through real difficulties in his life, and this was one of the groundbreaking things with Spider-Man. So I quickly became hugely admiring of the opportunity. Although when I first had it, I can't say that I was, there weren't the Spider-Man movies, and it wasn't the franchise that it is now. So it was like, oh, that's neat. And it was probably better because I wasn't intimidated and I wasn't, thinking this was as big as it actually turned out to be. But then I became a huge Spider-Man fan, and my son has now digested all of the volumes that I bought.
Oh, that's awesome that you've been able to carry on that legacy of Spider-Man with him. Yeah. Well, I, too, did not grow up a comic book lover or reader, but really the 1994 Spider-Man, as I told John Semper, the writer-producer, this was my introduction into the world of Marvel because we didn't just have Spider-Man. We had Daredevil and Blade and S.H.I.E.L.D. and Captain America and the Fantastic Four. It was just so wonderful for me because before that, we had the X-Men animated series and then Spider-Man, and those 2 were my immersion into Marvel. And I was just never much of a reader, and I was more of a visual kid growing up, kind of struggled with some dyslexia, kind of like Steven Spielberg. And so I was more visual, like he always talks about, he sees everything in picture. And so when I saw these shows, they became my world and what I envisioned the world of Marvel and Spider-Man and everything to be. So you really portrayed Harry Osborne for the first time in my mind ever, and you are my Harry Osborne. So thank you so much for what you did.
That's very nice. Many people who are the experts contend that particular series was the best Spider-Man series ever.
Oh, absolutely.
It certainly was the best one up to that point. I haven't really studied the later one, but I really admired all of the aspects. You mentioned John Semper. I have to say John is still a friend of mine, and we had a 20-year anniversary. I think it was last year now. We went to the Stan Lee Comic-Con in Los Angeles, and we did a panel. Almost all of the voices were there, the actors, and we saw John. John is at the moment crowdfunding for a new series based on the Rocket Man comics from the 30s.
Nice.
And he's threatening to hire all of us in order to do the voices on that show. So we have our fingers crossed with his crowdfunding. But John was one of the finest people I've ever worked for. One of the most creative, one of the kindest, one of the most even-tempered. He's just all about creation. And that was part of what made that show so much fun. And I think it's part of the reason the show was so good, because he really cared about the quality. And he fought hard for what he got. And I think the show shows it.
Oh, absolutely. When talking with John, it was kind of like talking to somebody who was a fan of the comics. And so he came from a perspective of, this is what the fans want. This is not what they want based on what the companies, the organizations like Fox were saying, this is what we want. But he's like, that's not what the fans are going to want, because he knew the comics. So that was awesome that John came from that perspective and that he had such a good connection with Stan Lee. So, but that's awesome that you guys got to do the reunion for the 20-year and that almost everybody was there. That's super fantastic.
Yeah.
So I know, being on that show, you worked with some amazing talents. Do you have any fun behind the scenes stories with the Spider-Man cast, or?
Well, I mean, it was like waiting to see who the new guest star was going to be. I know Mark Hamill played the Hobgoblin.
Yeah.
And so I ended up working with Mark a lot, and he would roll in the morning. We'd do them. I don't remember whether we did them from 9 to 12 or 10 to 1, but he would roll in, and as we all do, we roll in, not having to worry about being seen on camera. So most of us, are our normal selves rather than our made-up selves. And he would roll in and he would look like he had a hard night, but he would tell all these stories about Star Wars and the whole saga. And he and I became pretty good friends for the period of time that we worked together. But every week there was a new guest star. Hank Azaria played, Jesus, I'm trying to remember which part he played.
He was Eddie Brock.
There you go. You just tell me who these people played, because it's a while ago for me. But Hank and I became good friends. One week, Eddie Albert, who was a guy that I grew up watching on television in Green Acres and all different kinds of things, he came in and played a part. And it was just they got these incredible people to do that show. So every time I was, coming in for an episode, it was like, ooh, who am I going to meet this week?
I know. It was like, you look back at the cast now and like every one of the people in the show is like some epic actor. And you're like, holy cow, dude. Like, you don't have a lot of shows where you look back and every single person has this like epic career years later, It's unbelievable. But I know Mark Hamill is definitely one I would love to have on the show and talk with about Hobgoblin, because so many people talk to him about Joker, but I don't think a lot of people realize he was the Hobgoblin on the 94 Spider-Man, which was super cool, similar to Joker, but definitely had a different character, especially when he played his alter ego, Jason, the rich billionaire boy who no one really knew where he came from. And then all of a sudden we find out he's Hobgoblin. So, but, and then Mark, or not Mark, but Hank Azaria, is it Azaria or Azaria?
Azaria. One of those, yeah.
Well, I know with him playing Eddie Brock and Venom, that was one of the most sinister villains next to the Green Goblin characters. And I loved Hobgoblin, Green Goblin 1 and 2, and Venom. Those 4 villains were like the ultimate, like, holy cow, how is Spider-Man going to defeat these guys? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's just, I mean, growing up with the show, it was definitely like the mainstay of my life, because, there was Spider-Man, the Batman animated series, Power Rangers and everything, but Spider-Man held just such a great place in my heart. And I've seen every series since the 94, and they've taken Spider-Man and made him more of a younger, like freshman in high school kind of character, whereas the Peter Parker of the 94 Spider-Man was like right out of high school as he's going into college, kind of what we saw with the Sam Raimi movies. And I kind of like his age and where he's at, because the maturity he's coming into helps him be Spider-Man that we want to be, the Spider-Man we want to see. Whereas sometimes when he's a little kid, he does things that you're like, well, I mean, it probably plays well to the younger kids and preteens, teenagers, but it's not really affecting those who grew up with the comics and that kind of stuff. So I think to this day, it is the best Spider-Man series ever. And the animation still to this day looks stellar, off the charts.
Yeah, they did a fine job.
So besides playing on Thumbelina and in the 94 Spider-Man, what are some other acting opportunities or, voiceover or film wise that you've done that have been something that meant a lot to you or that were super epic in your life?
Well, the best story I could possibly tell you is I had the pleasure of guest starring on a special on NBC opposite Lucille Ball.
Oh, no way.
And she and I became really close friends for about 2 months. And I don't know how much time we have, but I'll tell you a couple of stories.
Yeah.
I was hired to play Fred Silverman, who at the time was the chief of programming at NBC. And they had actually conspired. Her husband and Fred Silverman had conspired to surprise her at Chasen's restaurant and convince her to become a producer at NBC. She was going to produce sitcoms. And they decided to make a special around introducing the first sitcom that she produced, which starred Donald O'Connor.
Wow.
And they decided to make a lot of jokes about young executives in television. So they hired me to play a 16-year-old playing Fred Silverman as if he was 16, running the programming at NBC.
That's funny.
And I didn't audition for her. I auditioned ultimately in the callback for her husband. And the day that we met, I don't know how much time we have for these stories.
Oh, you're fine.
I can
Just
talk
go.
about Lucy for the rest of the day.
You have
but
plenty of time. No worries.
I arrived on the set all nervous and excited to meet Lucy because I grew up with her. I mean, the Lucille Ball series I watched regularly, and then whenever I was sick, I watched reruns, where I was home from school. And so I was a huge fan. I've probably seen every episode many, many, many times.
Oh, wow.
And so I walked in to the studio, and I was crossing the rehearsal hall, and this, who I thought was the costumer, comes in. She had strawberry blonde hair, not red, strawberry blonde hair, and a cigarette dangling out of her mouth, and she had this sort of, house dress on, and she was carrying 2 big shopping bags filled with stuff. And I thought, oh, she's the costumer. And I passed by, and I hear this voice. She goes, "Are you Silverman?" And I didn't even stop. I didn't know what that was. And she said, "Are you Silverman?" And I turn around, and I looked at her, and then I saw her face, and I went, "Oh my God, that's Lucy." And she said, "Ha, ha, ha, that's funny. That's funny," because I guess this was the first time she was seeing me. And all of my stuff in the show was with her. And we became really good friends. She wanted me to speak at her class at Cal State Northridge. She was doing a class on the business part of the industry. And she wanted me to speak as an up-and-coming, rising young man in the business. And so in order to plan it, she said, "Come on over to my house." So I went over to Lucy's house on Roxbury Drive. And it turns out about 4 or 5 times I was at her house. And she told me stories and stories and stories and stories about her life.
Oh, wow.
And it was just one of the best experiences of my life. And then there's one more thing. When we shot the show, it was the day before Thanksgiving. And I brought my mother out because the guest stars on the episode, Donald O'Connor was on the episode, Gene Kelly guest starred on the episode.
Oh, no
Johnny
way.
Carson, Bob Hope.
Holy cow.
Donald O'Connor was on the show. Jack Klugman. Gary Coleman played my first assistant vice president when he was about 10. That was fun. I mean, it was just a great job. But she called me down. She saw me sitting with my mother on the audience bleachers. The audience wasn't in yet. And she called me down, and she said, what are you and your mother doing for Thanksgiving? And I said, well, I don't know. We're probably going to go to a restaurant. We haven't even thought about it because we're shooting the show today. And she said, nope, you're coming to our house. She said, I'm giving the servants the day off. It'll just be my husband and a family friend and your mother and me. Will that be okay with you? I said, sure. And so we went to her house, and we had Thanksgiving dinner. It was a beautiful dinner. And then afterwards, she showed me a show that her husband was putting together, which was Lucy the First 25 Years. And it was the best clips from all of the best episodes. And she told me all the inside stories about those episodes.
Oh, wow, Gary.
And my mother. And then she got a call at about 8:30 and said, oh, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. That was Desi Jr. He's coming over to announce his engagement to Linda Pearl. And we said, okay, well, that's a fine reason to leave. So we left, and I'm pulling out of Lucy's driveway, and my mother had a rose in her lap that Lucy had gotten for her. And my mother turned to me, and she said, I can die now, because it was such an amazing experience.
Wow.
So, and my mother got to meet Donald and Gene Kelly and Bob Hope and Johnny Carson, and she was just in heaven.
Oh,
and
wow.
to the day that my mother passed away, she had a picture of Lucy, me, and her over her bed. And so that's probably the best. I've also guest starred opposite Milton Berle, who was the king of television in the early years. And I've worked with many, 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 many people, but that's the highlight. Working with Lucy and going to her house and hearing all the inside stories about her life and her work was amazing.
Wow, Gary, I was not expecting quite such an epic story. That was quite mind-blowing, man. I mean, yeah. Gene Kelly and Bob Hope and Lucille, I mean, my gosh, man, the whole list of people you had there was just like, holy cow, that was like people I grew up with loving on the old movies, Singing in the Rain, yep. And the Lucille Ball Show, and just, I love Lucy. Wow, just mind-blowing. And I loved Bob Hope's movies, his funny humor and this quirkiness with all the people he teamed up with on his crazy movies. But wow, thank you so much for sharing that.
No problem. My pleasure.
Well, do you have a social media where people can reach out to you, whether they have questions or maybe they're looking to hire you for a voiceover project or something for film?
Well, many people are trying to get me to go on Twitter. I actually have an account, but I haven't used it yet. I'm embarrassed to say.
It's
I'm
okay.
a little,
I
I'm a
just
little,
recently got into it myself, so.
I'm a little bit of a Model T when it comes to social media. I have 2 Facebook accounts. I've maxed out one at 5,000, but there are 2 Facebook accounts. They're actually almost identical. So people can find me on Facebook, and if they find the site that's maxed out with 5,000 friends, all they have to do is look for the other site.
Okay.
And they should be able to find it. And I'm happy to friend anybody who would like to be friends with me on Facebook. I also have a website that has an email contact attached to it, and that's GaryImhoff.net, GaryIm as in Mary, HOFF as in Frank. So those are the 2 easiest ways to reach me.
Fantastic. Well, Gary, one of the things I always like to do when I have a special guest on the show is to ask what kind of advice would you give to someone who might be looking at joining this crazy world of acting, or more specifically getting into the niche of voiceover?
Well, first of all, there's a book, I think it's still published, written by a friend of mine. The funny thing is we never worked in voiceover together, but we were with the same agent for years.
Oh, really?
Susan Blue, BLU, who was a voiceover talent. I don't know what her credits were, but then she became a really big voiceover director. She wrote a book called Word of Mouth.
Okay.
And it's a really good basic introduction to the business. I don't know if she's updated it. I would imagine she has. And there may be other, great books out there. But that's one book I would recommend that will give people a really good beginning idea of what the business is about and how to go about doing the business. The other thing is I'll say to anybody what I said to the students at Lucille Ball's class at Cal State Northridge. There is not a how-to in this business. There is not a single way to become a voiceover actor or to get your break in on-camera work or film or television or whatever.
Yeah.
If there was, someone would have written that formula and they would own a country. And that's not been written. So what I recommend to people is to do, what you're doing, which is ask anyone they know, read anything they can find, ask anyone they know, and then basically follow their own nose, as I said at Lucy's class. Follow your nose. In other words, follow your own sense of what seems to be right. There are so many stories about how people broke into show business, and I told the kids at that time, you can't replicate how I broke into show business. There are probably only 2 or 3 Broadway shows that ever held open auditions in their local towns ever anyway, and that's how I broke in. And, Bradley Cooper made unsolicited audition tapes for hundreds and hundreds of films and television shows. And that's actually how he became friends with Robert De Niro. He submitted a tape for some film Robert De Niro was making, and Robert called him in, and he met him. And he said, look, kid, I'm not going to cast you in my movie, but what I want to tell you is keep doing what you're doing because it's going to pay off. You're honing your craft as you're doing it, and you're also getting people to know who you are. And look what happened to Bradley Cooper. And he's made 2 films with Robert De Niro, I'm sure partially based on that friendship that they struck up that day.
That's such an interesting story because Bradley Cooper is actually one of the actors of today who's meant a lot to me because his career started for me with Alias on J.J. Abrams' show, and then has blown up to where he's now on Guardians of the Galaxy and so many other wonderful movies. But wow, thank you so much for diving into that.
Yeah, well, really what it is, I do seminars here, and somebody who speaks at the seminars says there's not a star in Hollywood that didn't do something, quote unquote, a little crazy in order to get a job or to break in or do whatever. I'm not advocating that people break the law, but what I am saying is you got to take chances. You're not gonna break through the mass of people who are interested in doing this. You're not going to break through that way by being the most polite, by doing what's expected. You're going to break through by doing something that's unexpected. There's story after story after story that I could tell people about different chances that people took. And so Yeah, well, hang on. I don't know how much time you have. I'll tell you one more story.
You're
Nicole,
fine. We are fine on time.
it's not a voiceover story, but Nicole Kidman had done one movie that had shown in the United States. It was called Dead Calm, and she got her big break, which was To Die For, the movie that Gus Van Sant did, and she got that break by finding out what Gus Van Sant's home number was, calling him on a Sunday afternoon.
Wow.
He didn't know her, and he answered the phone, and she said, "My name is Nicole Kidman, and I am destined to play the lead in your movie To Die For." And I'm sure she used the name of the character, but I don't remember what the name of the character was. And he was so stunned by that, he said, "Keep talking." And they talked for 15 minutes. He had never met her. He had seen the movie, Dead Calm, so he was, aware of her. But he gave her the part over the phone without ever meeting her.
Wow.
And people asked him later, "Why did you do that?" And he said, I was aware of her work and I liked her. But he said, "Answer me this question. How good is any actress going to be on a normal agent, audition, compared with a girl who finds your home number, calls you on Sunday afternoon, and says, 'I'm destined to play this part'?" And the interesting thing is that's exactly what the character in the movie would have done. And so she perfectly paralleled that character, and he just knew that was the actress for the part. So, not everybody gets their break by doing something quite that, wild, but you have to take chances, and you have to be willing to have those chances not pay off, and take more chances, and try more things, and try more things. The biggest thing is, to follow Bradley Cooper's example, which is persist. Just keep persisting. And in the face of many, many, many no's or rejections or, no answer, just keep going. My wife, who's a commercial real estate broker, has an expression. She says, every no makes you that much closer to a yes. And that's the thing you want to keep in mind.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that, Gary, because, doing this podcast, when I started out, sometimes I was a little more, nervous and standoffish. And it was kind of like, sometimes you'd get those negative responses from an actor you're wanting to be on your show. And, if I didn't just keep persevering, I wouldn't be having a consistent weekly based airing show on the podcast. And so it does take a lot of gumption and a lot of guts to do it. But, as you persevere and get through those no's, eventually the no's don't mean anything to you. You just swat them out, you swat those no's back, and you keep on pushing forward. So
that's right.
Well, what was your favorite cartoon or favorite cartoon character growing up, and why, Gary?
Well, I would have to say that I was a big cartoon watcher. I wasn't a comic book reader, but I was a big cartoon watcher. And I have to say that anything Mel Blanc did was my favorite. I mean, he was just an icon, and the shows that he was on were astounding. And so let's see, my favorite. Wow, I have so many. I mean,
That's okay.
It's a bit of it's a little bit of a tie between a couple of Hanna-Barbera cartoons. I was a big fan of Yogi Bear.
Oh yeah.
And then I was a huge fan of the Jetsons later on. But I would have to say, the classic Bugs Bunny with Elmer Fudd, Daffy Duck, that series of cartoons, those were just amazing. The stories were amazing. The animation was amazing. The voices were amazing. What's interesting, another story, is a dear friend of mine is Nancy Cartwright, who does the voice of Bart Simpson.
What?
Oh,
no
yeah,
way.
very close. We've actually known each other since before she was Bart Simpson.
Wow.
And she had appeared it's a funny story because I don't do this very often, but she had appeared in a TV movie called Marion Rose White about a girl who was not mentally challenged, but they thought she was. Yeah. She wore thick glasses, and they put her actually in an asylum.
Oh,
and
wow.
it was all about this story of how, it was discovered that she actually, shouldn't have been there and all of that. And I saw the show, and I was very, very moved. And within a week, I went to a show at the Amundsen Theater, which is one of the big Broadway theaters here. And she walked in as a patron, as a somebody who was going to watch the show. And I don't usually do this, but during intermission, I walked up to her and I said, "Listen, I just saw you on a TV movie, Marion Rose White, and I have to tell you, I'm a huge fan. I'm an actor, and I just admired your work so much. A week later, she walked into the acting class I was studying in. And I did the first scene with her, and we became very, very, very close friends. And I remember the day in her house where she said to me, I want to show you something. She said, I got a part, and we're doing these little snippets of cartoons on the Tracy Ullman show. And the cartoon is called The Simpsons. And so she showed me the first experimental little clip of The Simpsons, which premiered on the Tracy Ullman show, which people probably don't remember. And the rest is history. So, but Nancy was a great follower of Dawes Butler.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Who is sort of the less famous Mel Blanc.
Yeah.
He did so many. He did Boo Boo Bear in Hanna-Barbera. He did Elroy in the Jetsons, and many, 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 many other voices. She studied with him. He used to do seminars around the country, and she went to a seminar that he did, a class that he did in somewhere in Ohio, where she's from, and that's actually how she got her start. So there's so many different ways to peel the onion of this business.
Well, that is so awesome that you know Nancy and that you kind of got some of that inside scoop before The Simpsons was The Simpsons we know today.
Yep. It's a phenomenon.
Well, you know, I was wondering, I don't know if you can do it today, but can you sing a little bit of Let Me Be Your Wing?
I don't know what voice I'm in. Let me see. Let me be your wings, let me be your only love, let me take you far beyond the stars. How about that?
Oh, wow, Gary. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
That means a lot to me, and it will mean a lot to my little sisters as well, because they were super huge fans of the show. They're, you know, one's grown with 2 kids now and married as I'm married, but the other one's still young and single in her early 20s. But wow, that means a lot to me and my family. So thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Well, Gary, it has been an absolute honor and pleasure having you on the show today. I have one final question for you, and we will wrap this thing up.
Sure.
What is the legacy that you want to leave behind?
Wow, that's a good question. No one's ever asked me that question. Well, I think really that you know, you and I talked before, and I told you that I'm a teacher.
Yeah.
And I've been a teacher of acting for 30 years. I teach acting to musical artists, and I teach acting to, you know, actors. And one of the reasons I love teaching, and I love teaching as much as anything that I do, I've been an actor, I've been a singer, I've been a director. I like to make a difference. I like to, you know, help people. I like to help people become bigger, better, more capable, achieve their dreams. And so I would hope that most of the projects, if not all of the projects I've been a part of, and I would hope that each actor that I've touched and each artist that I've touched, I hope that I've made a difference in a direction, and I hope the projects I've done have made a difference in the direction of helping people become more of what they dream that they can be. So I would have to say that would be the legacy that I hope I leave.
Absolutely, Gary. Thank you so very much for your valuable time and these amazing answers and stories. You've shared stuff with me that definitely blew my mind, and I was not prepared for today. So thank you so much. Well, Gary, it has been an absolute honor and pleasure having you on the show today. Would you please just close us out today as Harry Osborne, Green Goblin?
Sure.
I'm going to get you, Spider-Man.
This has been Gary Imhoff on Who Did That Voice?
Well, everyone, I sure hope you enjoyed today's episode with Gary Imhoff, the last of our interviews with the cast and crew of the 1994 Spider-Man the Animated Series for the month of June. I sure hope you've enjoyed this entire month long, full of Spider-Man interviews. And if you have, please find me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram by searching Who Did That Voice. I would love to hear from you. You know, a question you might ask yourself is, where can I listen to Who Did That Voice? That's an excellent question. You can hear us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, TuneIn Radio, YouTube, and our website at www.whodidthatvoice.co. Click the Episodes tab and listen away. Well, everyone, that's all the time we have for this episode. Join us this Friday for our next special guest, Joe Zija, the voice of Fox McCloud from Star Fox Zero, The Battle Begins. You won't want to miss this episode. Hey, do you ask yourself who did that voice? Well, if you do, go to our website, www.whodidthatvoice.co, and click on the Episodes tab. Choose an actor, pick their name, and see pictures from the different characters they voiced in their career.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next time for more discoveries on Who Did That Voice.